The plasma rifle's muzzle pressed against Captain Marcus Chen's temple as Queen Vexazandra of the Catherian Empire studied his scarred hands. Her 6 eyes, each a different shade of violet, tracked every line of damaged flesh that wrapped around his knuckles like ancient battle maps. "Remove your uniform," she commanded, her voice carrying the authority of 1,000 conquered worlds. Marcus didn't flinch. The royal chamber's crystalline walls reflected his image in fractured pieces, a human surrounded by towering insectoid guards whose chitinous armor gleamed like obsidian. 3 days ago, his stealth ship had been captured attempting to sabotage the Catherian fleet. 3 days of interrogation had yielded nothing. Today felt different. The Queen's mandibles clicked with impatience. "Your silence protects no one, Captain. Earth burns as we speak. Your colonies surrender one by one. Yet you sit here, defiant, hiding behind scars and soldiers' pride." Marcus slowly unbuttoned his jacket, revealing a torso cross-hatched with wounds that had healed badly. Burns from plasma fire, deep gouges from Kytherian claws, surgical scars where shrapnel had been hastily removed. The Queen's compound eyes widened as she processed the sheer volume of damage. "Fascinating," she murmured, her voice dropping to something almost resembling curiosity. "Your medical records indicate you've been injured 47 times in combat. 17 should have been fatal. Yet you continue to fight." A smaller figure emerged from behind the throne. Princess Zara, the Queen's heir, barely past her first molting. Her carapace still held the golden hue of youth, and her eyes carried something her mother's had lost long ago: wonder. "Mother, why doesn't he regenerate like us?" the princess asked, her voice high and musical. The Queen's antennae twitched with irritation. "Silence, child! Return to your chambers." But Princess Zara stepped closer, studying Marcus with the fearless curiosity of youth. "His wounds? They stay forever?" Marcus met the young alien's gaze. "Yes." The single word hung in the air like a challenge. The guards shifted, their weapons humming with energy. Speaking without permission carried severe consequences, but Marcus had calculated the risk. "Every one of these scars tells a story," he continued, his voice steady despite the rifle still pressed against his skull. "This one," he gestured to a ragged line across his chest, "came from defending a refugee transport filled with children. This burn on my shoulder happened when I held a collapsing tunnel long enough for my squad to escape." The Queen's eyes narrowed to slits. Propaganda. Human weakness disguised as nobility. "Maybe," Marcus said, "but those children lived. My squad made it home. And I carry the proof of every life I've saved written in my flesh." Princess Zara took another step forward, ignoring her mother's warning hiss. "Does it hurt?" "Every day." "Why let yourself be damaged?" Marcus looked directly at the Queen now, his gaze unflinching. "Because some things are worth the pain." The chamber fell silent except for the rhythmic clicking of the guards' claws against their weapons. The Queen's 6 eyes studied Marcus with new intensity, as if seeing him for the first time. Her daughter's questions had shifted something in the air, a crack in the carefully constructed dynamic of captor and prisoner. "Your Majesty," one of the guards rumbled, his voice like grinding stone, "shall we proceed with execution?" The Queen raised one clawed hand, forestalling action. "No, not yet." Her gaze returned to Marcus's scars, tracing patterns of old wounds with scientific fascination. "These marks. They are not random. There is methodology in their placement. Strategy." Marcus remained silent, but his slight nod confirmed her observation. "You use your body as a weapon," she realized. "Not just to deliver violence, but to absorb it, to protect others by making yourself the target. It's what soldiers do." "No," the Queen said, her voice carrying a strange note of respect. "It's what your soldiers do. We have studied your species for decades, Captain. Your military doctrine confuses us. You sacrifice the strong to save the weak. You spend your best warriors to preserve those who cannot fight. It defies all evolutionary logic." Princess Zara moved even closer, now within arm's reach of the human prisoner. "Mother, his scars are like maps. Each one connects to another. See how they form patterns?" The Queen's compound eyes followed her daughter's observation, and her mandibles clicked with sudden understanding. "Battle formations. You carry the memory of every engagement on your skin." Marcus finally smiled, the expression both grim and proud. "We don't just fight for our people, Your Majesty. We carry them with us. Every scar is a reminder of why we cannot surrender." The plasma rifle pressed harder against his temple, but Marcus didn't break eye contact with the Queen. In that moment, she saw something that shattered her understanding of human warfare. Not the brutality of conquest, but the mathematics of sacrifice. Each wound was deliberate, purposeful, a conscious choice to bear pain so others wouldn't have to. The Queen raised her other hand, and the guard slowly lowered his weapon. "Tell me about this war, Captain," she said quietly. "Tell me why your people choose to scar themselves for strangers." Princess Zara watched her mother's face change, seeing something new bloom in those ancient violet eyes. The young royal didn't understand it yet, but she was witnessing the moment when a conqueror first glimpsed the true strength of her enemy. Marcus straightened, despite his wounds, despite his captivity, despite the odds. "Your Majesty, if you truly want to understand why humans fight, I need to tell you about the Battle of Kepler Station." The Queen settled back on her throne, her daughter beside her, both listening as Marcus began to speak of war, not as glory, but as the price willingly paid for love. The holographic display materialized between them, showing the strategic layout of Kepler Station, humanity's last major outpost before Earth. Marcus gestured to specific points with hands that bore scars from that very battle. 17,000 civilians, he began, his voice taking on the cadence of a military briefing. Research families, children, elderly scientists who'd spent their lives pushing the boundaries of human knowledge. When your advance fleet arrived, they had 6 hours to evacuate. Queen Vexandra leaned forward, her compound eyes processing the tactical display with professional interest. Her military background demanded she understand the strategic value of every position, every choice. Evacuation should have been completed in 3 hours with proper planning. It should have been, Marcus agreed, but the station's gravity well generator was damaged in the initial bombardment. The evacuation ships couldn't achieve escape velocity with full passenger loads. Princess Zara watched the hologram shift, showing the complex orbital mechanics that trapped the fleeing vessels. Why didn't they just leave some behind? The question hung in the air like a blade. Marcus met her innocent gaze and saw in her the same analytical coldness her species was known for, the practical calculation that weighed lives against strategic advantage. "Because we don't leave people behind," he said simply. The Queen's antennae twitched with impatience. Inefficient, emotional decision-making that compromised the overall mission. "Yes," Marcus said, surprising her with his agreement. "From a purely tactical standpoint, your assessment is correct. We could have saved 11,000 and preserved our military assets for future engagements." He manipulated the hologram, highlighting the human fleet positions. "Instead, we chose to buy time. Every warship, every fighter, every soldier on that station positioned themselves between your fleet and the evacuation vessels. The display showed the human formation, a thin line of ships facing overwhelming odds. The mathematical certainty of their defeat was obvious even to Princess Zara. "Suicide," the Queen observed. "You threw away your military strength for emotional satisfaction." Marcus nodded slowly. "From your perspective, absolutely. But you're missing something crucial." He zoomed in on specific sections of the battle. "These aren't random positions. Every ship placement, every fighter squadron, every defensive emplacement was calculated to maximize one thing: time." The hologram began to move, showing the progression of the battle. Human ships didn't attempt to win, they attempted to delay. Each vessel that fell had positioned itself to create debris fields that slowed the Kytherian advance. Fighters used ramming attacks not for damage, but to force course corrections that ate precious minutes. "Each minute cost us 3 ships, Marcus continued, his voice steady despite the memories. "Each minute saved 200 civilian lives." Princess Zara watched the simulation with growing fascination. "But you knew you would die." "Some of us, yes." That was the calculation. Marcus highlighted specific vessels. The escort carriers withdrew after launching their fighters. The supply ships left once their munitions were expended. But the frontline vessels, the ones with the heaviest armor and best shields, we stayed until the end. The Queen studied the formation with new understanding. "You used your strongest units as ablative armor for your weakest population segments." "In a way, yes. But that's not how we see it." Marcus manipulated the display to show individual crew manifests. These weren't just ships, they were families. The captain of the destroyer Defiance had a daughter on one of the evacuation transports. The wing commander of Fighter Squadron 7 had just gotten engaged to a researcher in Kepler's biology lab. The hologram showed personal connections, lines of relationship that crisscrossed the fleet like a complex web, husbands protecting wives, parents protecting children, friends protecting friends. "Your military structure is built on emotional attachments," the Queen observed, her voice carrying something that might have been disapproval or fascination. And that's exactly why we won. The statement stopped the Queen cold. Won? Captain, your forces were completely destroyed. Kepler's station fell. By any strategic measure, this was a total defeat. Marcus smiled grimly. Your Majesty, you're thinking like a conqueror.
We were.
Thinking like protectors. He changed the display to show the broader strategic picture. Yes, we lost Kepler Station. But those 17,000 civilians reached Earth safely. Among them were the designers of our new shield technology, the mathematicians who cracked your fleet communication codes, the doctors who developed treatments for plasma burn injuries. The Queen's 6 eyes widened as understanding dawned. Every person we saved at Kepler became a force multiplier in subsequent battles. The emotional cost of their rescue became the logical foundation of our eventual victory. Marcus gestured to his own scarred body. This is why we accept wounds, Your Majesty. This is why we carry scars. Because the pain of sacrifice becomes the strength of survival. Princess Zara spoke into the silence that followed. Mother, in all our conquered worlds, do we have soldiers who would die for researchers? The question pierced the Queen's composure like a blade. In the Catherian Empire, military assets were precisely that, assets to be deployed efficiently. The concept of soldiers dying for non-combatants violated every principle of rational warfare, but as she stared at the human captain's scars, Queen Vexandra began to understand why her superior forces had been losing this war. The chamber's atmosphere grew heavy as the implications of Marcus's words settled into the Queen's consciousness. Her compound eyes tracked across his scars again, but now she saw them differently, not as wounds, but as investments. Each mark represented a decision to accept personal damage in exchange for collective survival. "Show me another battle," she commanded, her voice tight with controlled emotion. Marcus nodded and shifted the holographic display. The defense of New Singapore. 3 months after Kepler fell. The new battle map materialized, a sprawling urban center built across multiple orbital platforms. Unlike Kepler's straightforward evacuation scenario, this showed a complex web of civilian populations integrated throughout military installations. Your forces had learned from Kepler, Marcus observed. Instead of giving us time to evacuate, you launched simultaneous strikes across all platforms. Surgical precision, military targets only, minimal civilian casualties. Princess Zara studied the tactical display with growing sophistication. We were trying to separate your soldiers from your emotional attachments. Exactly. Brilliant strategy, actually. By the book, it should have worked. Marcus highlighted specific strikes. You eliminated our command structure, disabled our communications, and isolated individual units from any coordinated response. The Queen leaned forward, her professional interest overriding her personal discomfort. Then how did you maintain resistance for 18 days? Cut off from leadership, your forces should have surrendered within hours. Because you misunderstood our command structure. The hologram zoomed in on individual soldiers scattered throughout the city. When Lieutenant Sarah Chen lost contact with her commanding officer, she didn't wait for orders. She saw civilians trapped in a collapsed shopping complex and spent 6 hours digging them out by hand. The display showed Chen's unit position, tactically irrelevant, strategically meaningless, but centered in a dense civilian area. Her scarred hands, visible in the medical records, told the story of torn fingernails and burned palms. Corporal James Wright's squad was supposed to hold the eastern approaches, Marcus continued. Instead, they found a school full of children whose transport had been damaged. They carried each child individually to the evacuation zone. 47 trips across enemy-controlled territory. More soldiers appeared on the display, each making similar choices. Not random acts of heroism, but systematic prioritization of civilian protection over military objectives. Your daughter asked if we have soldiers who would die for researchers, Marcus said to the Queen. The answer is yes. But more importantly, we have soldiers who will live for children, who will endure pain for strangers, who will accept wounds to prevent them in others. The Queen's mandibles clicked rapidly, a sign of stress in her species. This violates every principle of efficient warfare. You compromise military effectiveness for emotional satisfaction? No, Your Majesty. We compromise short-term tactical advantage for long-term strategic strength. Marcus manipulated the display to show the broader conflict timeline. Every civilian we saved became a supporter. Every family we kept together became a source of volunteers. Every act of protection became a recruitment tool. Princess Zara watched the numbers cascade across the hologram. The humans weren't just fighting us. They were building something. Building what? The Queen demanded. Marcus met her gaze directly. A civilization worth dying for. The words hung in the crystalline air like a challenge to everything the Cytherian Empire represented. The Queen's species had built their dominion through rational expansion, efficient resource allocation, and the calculated application of superior force. They conquered worlds by demonstrating the futility of resistance. But humanity offered something different: the mathematics of sacrifice, the logic of love, the strategic value of scars. Your empire spreads through fear, Marcus continued. You show conquered peoples that resistance is hopeless, that submission is the only rational choice. But we showed them something else, that some things are worth fighting for, regardless of the odds. The hologram expanded to show the war's progression across multiple systems. Each human defeat had planted seeds of inspiration. Each sacrifice had demonstrated that powerful forces could be resisted. Each scar had proved that pain could be transformed into purpose. The Battle of New Singapore lasted 18 days, not because of superior tactics or better technology, Marcus said quietly. It lasted because every single human soldier understood that their scars meant something, that their wounds were purchasing something precious. Queen Vexandra stared at the display in silence, her 6 eyes processing information that challenged the fundamental assumptions of her worldview. Beside her, Princess Zara watched her mother's composure crack like aging chitin. "What did you purchase?" the Queen finally asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Marcus smiled, not with triumph, but with the quiet satisfaction of a teacher whose student had finally grasped a difficult concept. "Time, Your Majesty. We purchased time for our children to grow up unafraid." The words hit the Queen like a physical blow, and she understood with crystalline clarity why her empire was losing this war. The revelation transformed Queen Vexandra's posture. Her chitinous frame, which had radiated imperial authority moments before, now seemed to fold inward as she processed the implications of Marcus's words. Around the chamber, her guards shifted uneasily, sensing their sovereign's distress without understanding its source. "Guards, withdraw to the outer chamber," she commanded, her voice carrying none of its usual steel. The massive insectoid warriors hesitated, their compound eyes reflecting confusion. In 2 centuries of service, they had never been dismissed during an interrogation of such critical importance. "Your Majesty," the senior guard rumbled, his voice like grinding stone, "security protocols require—" "I am altering the protocols." Her words cut through his objection with quiet finality. "Withdraw, now." The guards filed out, their heavy footfalls echoing against the crystalline walls until only the Queen, her daughter, and the scarred human remained. The chamber's vast space suddenly felt intimate, almost fragile. Princess Zara moved closer to her mother's throne, her young eyes wide with questions she didn't yet know how to ask. The golden hue of her carapace caught the chamber's prismatic light, making her seem luminous against the darker background of her mother's ancient chitin. "Captain Chen," the Queen said, and Marcus noted she had used his name for the first time. "I need you to explain something that defies our understanding." She gestured, and the holographic display shifted to show casualty reports from recent battles. The numbers glowed in the air between them. Thousands of human dead, entire fleets destroyed, colonies evacuated or lost. According to our intelligence, your forces have suffered losses at a rate of 3 to 1 compared to ours. Your industrial capacity has been reduced by 60%. Your military infrastructure has been systematically dismantled. The Queen's voice carried the precision of a scientist stating observable facts. "By every rational measure, humanity should have sued for peace months ago." Marcus nodded slowly. "From a purely mathematical standpoint, yes. We should have surrendered. Yet, resistance has increased in the past quarter cycle. Recruitment among your remaining colonies has tripled. Voluntary conscription has reached levels our sociologists consider impossible." The Queen's antennae twitched with genuine bewilderment. "Captain, your people are volunteering to die at a rate that exceeds our ability to kill them." Princess Zara spoke into the silence that followed. "Mother, is that why the war reports have been different lately?" The Queen's compound eyes focused on her daughter with sharp intensity. "What do you mean?" "The briefings have been shorter. The victory celebrations have been postponed. The military advisors keep requesting additional resources for operations that should have ended weeks ago." The young princess's voice carried the clarity of youth unburdened by political calculation. "Are we losing?" The question hung in the crystalline air like an accusation. Queen Vexandra, ruler of 17 systems and conqueror of a dozen species, found herself unable to answer her own daughter's simple inquiry. Marcus watched the exchange with careful attention, noting the family dynamic that existed beneath the imperial formality. The queen's protective instinct toward her daughter was obvious and remarkably similar to the human parental bond that drove so much of his species' behavior. "Your Majesty," he said gently, "may I ask you something?" The queen gestured for him to proceed, her movements betraying a weariness that seemed to extend beyond physical exhaustion. "If Princess Zara were threatened, what would you do to protect her?" The response was immediate and visceral. The queen's entire posture shifted, her body language becoming predatory and alert. Her claws extended involuntarily, and her eyes blazed with an intensity that made the chamber's light seem dim by comparison. "I would burn worlds," she said, her voice carrying absolute conviction. "I would sacrifice fleets, armies, entire star systems. There is no cost I would not pay, no price too high. Even if it meant certain defeat? Even if resistance was mathematically futile?" "Yes." The answer came without hesitation, stripped of political calculation or strategic consideration. "Yes." Marcus smiled, but there was no triumph in the expression, only recognition. "Your Majesty, you just described human military doctrine." The queen's eyes widened as understanding crashed over her like a tidal wave. Every human soldier she had faced, every resistance cell that had fought beyond all reasonable hope, every civilian who had chosen death over submission, they had all been acting from the same primal imperative that she felt toward her own daughter. "But we are conquering your worlds," she protested weakly. "We are winning the territorial battles." "Yes, you are, but you're not conquering our children." Marcus's voice carried the quiet certainty of absolute truth. "Every world you take, you leave behind a generation that has seen their parents fight impossible odds for love. Every victory you win teaches our young that some things are worth dying for." Princess Zara stepped closer to the holographic display, her young mind processing connections that her mother's experience-hardened intellect had missed. "The scars aren't just individual, are they? They're collective." Marcus turned his attention to the princess, recognizing in her the sharp intelligence that had made her mother such a formidable ruler. "Explain what you see. Each battle you lose creates more humans who understand that resistance is possible. Each sacrifice demonstrates that our empire isn't invincible. Each scar proves that powerful forces can be wounded." The princess's voice grew stronger as she worked through the logic. "You're not just fighting for territory or resources. You're fighting for the right of future generations to choose their own scars." The queen stared at her daughter in amazement, seeing her heir grasp strategic concepts that had eluded her own military advisors. But more than that, she saw her daughter beginning to understand the fundamental difference between conquest and annihilation. "Captain," the queen said slowly, "what happens if we withdraw? If we end this war and leave your species in peace?" Marcus considered the question with the same careful attention he gave to tactical problems. "Honestly, we rebuild. We remember. And in a generation or two, we probably start expanding into systems you consider yours. And if we continue the war until your species is extinct, then you'll spend the next century fighting the children of every species that watched us resist you. You'll face rebellions and systems that have been pacified for decades. You'll discover that our scars have become their inspiration." The queen closed her 6 eyes, her mind working through scenarios that grew more troubling with each permutation. Victory meant inheriting an empire riddled with the seeds of future rebellion. Defeat meant facing an expanding human civilization that had learned to fight impossible odds. But there was a third option, one that had never occurred to her before this moment. "What if," she said quietly, "we learned to bear our own scars?" The question transformed the chamber's atmosphere, filling it with possibilities that neither conquest nor defeat could offer. Marcus leaned forward, his own scarred hands steady as he prepared to discuss the most dangerous topic of all, hope. The queen's words hung in the crystal chamber like a bridge spanning an impossible chasm. Around them, the walls reflected fractured images of the 3 figures, alien royalty, human soldier, and a young princess whose questions had started unraveling centuries of imperial doctrine. "Mother?" Princess Zara's voice carried a note of confusion. "What do you mean, learn to bear our own scars?" Queen Vexandra studied her daughter's unmarked carapace, golden and perfect in its youth. In Kytherian society, scars were aberrations to be healed immediately, wounds to be erased through advanced medical intervention. The concept of carrying permanent reminders of pain was fundamentally alien to their culture. "Captain Chen," the queen said, her voice carefully controlled, "your species chooses to retain these marks of damage, but they serve no biological function. They don't enhance strength or provide tactical advantage. Why preserve them? Marcus traced a particularly prominent scar across his forearm, a jagged line where Catherian claws had nearly severed the limb during the evacuation of Proxima Colony. Because forgetting the cost makes you willing to pay it carelessly. These scars remind me that every choice has consequences. Every victory requires sacrifice. He gestured to the holographic display, which still showed the tactical map of New Singapore. Every mark on my body represents a moment when I had to decide what was worth protecting. The scar reminds me that the decision mattered. Princess Zara moved closer to examine Marcus's scarred hands, her young mind grappling with concepts that challenged everything she had been taught about strength and perfection. But doesn't it hurt to remember? Yes, Marcus admitted. Every day. But the alternative is worse. What alternative? Forgetting why the pain was necessary in the first place. The Queen watched her daughter process this exchange, seeing her heir encounter ideas that could reshape their entire civilization. The Catherian Empire had been built on the principle of eliminating weakness, of perfecting strength through the removal of all flaws. But humanity suggested something different, that weakness acknowledged and accepted could become its own form of strength. Your Majesty, Marcus continued, may I ask about your own experiences in combat? The Queen's compound eyes narrowed with suspicion. What relevance does that have? Humor me. Before you became ruler, you served in the military, correct? The records indicate extensive combat experience? Yes. I commanded the Third Fleet during the expansion wars. 17 systems fell under my leadership. Her voice carried the pride of proven competence. And in those campaigns, did you ever face situations where victory required sacrificing something valuable? The Queen's antennae twitched with memory. Of course, war always involves calculated losses. Tell me about one. The command came gently, but with the same authority Marcus might use with his own subordinates. To the surprise of everyone in the chamber, including herself, the Queen found herself responding. The Siege of Altair 7. A heavily fortified world with significant mineral resources. The defenders had taken civilian hostages and positioned them around strategic targets. Her voice took on the cadence of a military briefing. Standard protocol would have been orbital bombardment followed by ground assault. Efficient, decisive, minimal military casualties. Princess Ara leaned forward, captivated by this glimpse into her mother's past. What did you do? I chose a more complex approach. Extended siege, precision strikes, ground forces deployed to minimize civilian casualties. The Queen's voice grew quieter. The campaign took 3 times longer than projected. I lost 47 ships and nearly 10,000 soldiers. Marcus nodded slowly. And afterward, how did you feel about those losses? They were regrettable, inefficient. Campaign succeeded, but at unnecessary cost. The Queen's words carried the weight of old guilt, carefully buried but never entirely forgotten. Were they unnecessary? The question struck like a physical blow. The Queen stared at Marcus, her 6 eyes processing emotions she had spent decades avoiding. The civilian casualties would have been significant under standard protocol, she said slowly. How significant? 2 million, mostly non-combatants. Families, children, elderly individuals with no strategic value. The number hung in the air like an accusation. Princess Zara's golden carapace seemed to dim as she processed the implications of her mother's choice, and the alternative that had been avoided. Your Majesty, Marcus said gently, you chose to accept military losses to prevent civilian casualties. You sacrificed efficiency for morality. You allowed your forces to be wounded so that innocents could live. It was a tactical decision based on long-term strategic considerations, the Queen protested, but her voice lacked conviction. No, Marcus said firmly. It was a choice based on the same principle that drives human resistance. You decided that some things are worth protecting, even at personal cost. The Queen's compound eyes widened as she recognized the truth in his words. Her decision at Altair 7 had been driven by the same emotional calculus that she had just dismissed as inefficient human weakness. The difference, Marcus continued, is that we choose to remember these decisions. We carry the scars as proof that we can choose compassion over convenience, protection over perfection. Princess Zara spoke into the silence that followed. Mother, do you ever think about the soldiers who died at Altair 7? Yes, the Queen whispered. Every day. Then you already carry scars. You just hide them. The observation came from a young princess barely past her first molting, but it struck with the force of absolute truth. Queen Vexandra, conqueror of worlds and ruler of systems, felt something crack in her chest. Not her carapace, but something deeper and more fundamental. "Captain Chen," she said, her voice barely audible, "if we were to end this war, if we were to find another path, what would that look like?" Marcus studied her face, seeing something he had never expected to find in an enemy ruler. Genuine uncertainty, authentic vulnerability, the willingness to consider that everything she had believed might be wrong. It would mean accepting that strength and scars aren't opposites, he said. It would mean building something together instead of taking from each other. It would mean choosing to protect instead of conquer. And the cost? Marcus smiled, touching one of his more prominent scars. Everything you think you know about power. Everything you believe about strength. Everything you've been taught about what makes a civilization worth preserving. The queen looked at her daughter, seeing in the young princess's eyes a willingness to embrace ideas that could transform their entire species. Then she looked at the human soldier, scarred and defiant, but offering something more valuable than surrender, the possibility of redemption. "Captain," she said finally, "I need you to teach us how to choose our own wounds." In that moment, the war between their species began to transform into something neither conquest nor defeat, but the far more difficult process of learning to heal together. The transformation began with silence. Queen Vexandra stood from her throne, her massive form moving with deliberate grace toward the chamber's central communication console. Her 6 eyes remained fixed on Marcus as she placed one clawed hand on the interface that connected her to the entire Catherian fleet. "What are you doing, Mother?" Princess Zara asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Something that may destroy our empire," the queen replied, her tone carrying both fear and determination. "Or transform it into something worth preserving." The console activated, displaying the positions of 17 Catherian battle groups scattered across human space. Each icon represented thousands of ships, millions of soldiers, the accumulated might of a civilization built on conquest. With a single command, the queen could order the final assault that would end humanity forever. Instead, she input a code that hadn't been used in over 3 centuries, the Imperial Recall Signal. Marcus watched in stunned silence as every Catherian fleet began adjusting course, their vectors shifting from attack formations to withdrawal trajectories. The holographic display showed the massive alien armada pulling back from human worlds, abandoning sieges that had lasted months, canceling operations that would have claimed millions of lives. "Your Majesty," Marcus said carefully, "your military commanders will demand explanations." "Yes, they will." The Queen's compound eyes reflected the light of distant stars as fleets began their long journey home. "And I will tell them that we have discovered something more valuable than victory." "What's that?" "The possibility of being worthy of the power we wield." Princess Zara moved to stand beside her mother, her young mind grappling with the magnitude of what was occurring. "The fleet admirals will resist. Some may refuse the order entirely." Queen Vexandra's antennae twitched with grim acknowledgement. "Admiral Thexmore of the 4th Fleet has already requested clarification. Admiral Vexarna of the 9th is demanding direct communication. They see this as madness." "Maybe it is," Marcus said quietly. The Queen turned to face him, her imposing form silhouetted against the star field visible through the chamber's crystalline walls. "Captain, in your species' history, have there been moments when individuals chose to reject everything they had been taught about power and success?" Marcus considered the question, thinking of historical figures who had abandoned conquest for conscience. "Yes, but it always came at a cost." "What kind of cost?" "Everything. Status, security, the approval of their peers. Sometimes their lives." The Queen nodded slowly. "And yet they made that choice anyway. Some did. Why?" Marcus traced one of his scars absently, the gesture having become unconscious over years of bearing the marks. "Because they discovered that some forms of strength require giving up other forms of power." A new signal appeared on the communication console, an incoming message from Admiral Thexmore marked with the highest priority codes. The Queen stared at the flashing indicator for a long moment before accepting the transmission. The Admiral's image materialized in the chamber, his massive insectoid form bristling with barely contained fury. His compound eyes reflected the bridge lights of his flagship, and his mandibles clicked with aggressive agitation. "Your Majesty," he began without preamble, "I must protest these orders in the strongest possible terms. We are on the verge of complete victory. Human resistance has been systematically dismantled. One final coordinated assault would end this war within days. Admiral Thexmore, the Queen replied, her voice carrying absolute authority. The orders stand. All fleets will return to Catherian space immediately. But, Your Majesty, we have invested enormous resources in this campaign. Thousands of ships, countless soldiers, strategic positioning that took months to achieve. To withdraw now would waste everything we have sacrificed. Princess Zara stepped forward, her young voice cutting through the Admiral's protests. Admiral, what is the purpose of our military strength? The question caught the veteran commander off guard. To serve the Empire, Your Highness. To expand our territory and secure our interests. And what is the purpose of the Empire? The Admiral's compound eyes shifted uncertainly. To provide security and prosperity for our people. Then tell me, the princess continued with the relentless logic of youth, how does conquering the humans serve that purpose? We eliminate a potential threat. We acquire their resources and territory. But Captain Chen has shown us that conquest breeds resistance. Every world we take by force becomes a source of future rebellion. Every species we dominate becomes an enemy waiting for the right moment to strike back. The princess gestured to Marcus, who remained silent but alert. What if, instead of creating enemies, we could create allies? Admiral Thexmore's antennae twitched with confusion and growing alarm. Your Highness, alliance implies equality. The Kytherian Empire has survived and prospered because we maintain dominance over lesser species. Lesser? The Queen's voice carried a dangerous edge. Admiral, I have spent considerable time studying human military doctrine. They have demonstrated tactical innovations that our strategists failed to anticipate. They have shown resilience that defies our projections. They have displayed loyalty and sacrifice that exceeds our understanding. She paused, her 6 eyes focusing on the Admiral with laser intensity. In what sense are they lesser? The Admiral's image flickered as he struggled to formulate a response that wouldn't challenge Imperial doctrine while acknowledging observable reality. Your Majesty, they are physically weaker. Their technology is inferior. Their territorial holdings are insignificant compared to ours. And yet, Marcus interjected quietly, we're still fighting. The simple statement hung in the air like a challenge to everything the Catherian Empire represented. Admiral Thexmore's compound eyes swiveled to focus on the human prisoner, his mandibles clicking with aggressive recognition. You, he said, his voice carrying pure venom, are responsible for the deaths of thousands of my soldiers. Yes, Marcus agreed without defensiveness, just as you're responsible for the deaths of thousands of mine. Then you understand why this war must end with your species' complete destruction. I understand why this war must end with both our species learning something new about strength. The Admiral's image seemed to expand as his fury grew. Your Majesty, this human has clearly influenced your judgment through psychological manipulation. I request permission to resume operations immediately. Permission denied, the Queen said with finality. Then I must formally invoke Article 7 of the Military Code. Any fleet commander may assume temporary authority if the sovereign's judgment appears compromised by enemy influence. The chamber fell deadly silent. Article 7 had never been invoked in Kytherian history, but its existence provided military leaders with a theoretical safeguard against royal incompetence or corruption. The Admiral was essentially declaring his intention to commit mutiny if his orders weren't rescinded. Queen Vexandra moved toward the communication console with predatory grace, her entire posture radiating the lethal authority that had made her one of the most feared rulers in the galaxy. Admiral Thexmore, she said, her voice dropping to barely above a whisper, are you suggesting that I am no longer fit to command? The Admiral's image wavered slightly, but his resolve remained firm. Your Majesty, I am suggesting that this human has compromised your strategic judgment. The decision to withdraw contradicts everything our empire represents. Perhaps, the Queen said quietly, it's time our empire represented something new. The transmission ended abruptly as Admiral Thexmore cut the connection. Within moments, new signals appeared on the console. Emergency communications from other fleet commanders, intelligence reports of ships changing course without authorization, priority alerts indicating the beginning of a military crisis that could shatter the Catherian Empire from within. Princess Zara moved closer to her mother, her golden carapace reflecting the chaos of incoming messages. Mother, what happens now? Queen Vexandra studied the tactical display showing her fragmenting fleet, some ships following recall orders while others maintained attack positions. Her empire was splitting along lines of loyalty and ideology, with the future of both species hanging in the balance. Now, she said, looking at Marcus with something approaching respect, we discover whether the scars we choose are stronger than the wounds others inflict upon us. The real war, not between species, but between different visions of what strength could mean, was about to begin.